BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Well, welcome to our discussion on Thomas Henry Horan and the Great Zodiac Killer Hoax. This is one of the major alternative theories out there in all of the studies on the Zodiac Killer. And as you can see, this is not the first segment. This is listed as part 7. But if this is the first link that you've clicked on, you can keep listening. Go ahead. Feel free to stay tuned, because we're just having a discussion about the Zodiac Killer and one of the more notorious alternative theories out there. Now, I gotta say, we don't do traditional film reviews and book reviews and documentary reviews on this channel, not really in the traditional format. And there's a reason why. It's because, you got to criticize the writing style so much. But I have to tell you, if you ever want to read Thomas Henry Horan's books, oh dear, it's getting a little bit mind-numbing. It feels like when I'm reading this, every other sentence is, Gray Smith lied, Gray Smith fabricated something, Gray Smith lied, Gray Smith fabricated something. Gray Smith introduces one of his least excusable lies. Gray Smith introduces a myth fabricated by Graysmith. I mean, it's like you're just getting a lot of the same words used over and over again. And as we said in a previous segment, it is true that this book was written as a debunking companion to Robert Graysmith's very famous book Zodiac from 1986. I get that, but at the same time, I mean, it's very, very repetitive with the word order. But we've just completed Chapter 3, actually, and we've had a lot of discussions about Darlene Ferrin and the Blue Rock Springs incident, which of course led to Darlene Ferrin's murder, and Michael Michaud survived. The conclusion of Chapter 3 in this book is really about how the evidence that is provided in Robert Graysmith's 1986 book Zodiac veer away from the facts, and very specifically Mike Michaud's witness statement, because they had a surviving witness. And you can see, though, that what Horan is really trying to argue is that Graysmith altered the course of Zodiac history. So many things that we think about how the Zodiac Killer was operating, how he interacted, the details get really, really foggy. Like, somebody reports seeing a man arguing with a woman in a parking lot at Terry's restaurant. Darlene Ferrin was a server at Terry's restaurant. Graysmith would have you believe that somebody was arguing with Darlene Ferrin in the restaurant, except it's the time of day was completely wrong. It's like this was happening at 10:30 a.m. It was a different man arguing with a different woman. Graysmith reported it as 10:30 p.m., a time when Darlene Ferrin was actually there. Darlene Ferrin wouldn't even have been at Terry's restaurant at that time. The book is filled with things like that, about how things are incorrectly reported. But Thomas Henry Horan really says very clearly that Graysmith deliberately lies about these things, and they are intentional fabrications, as opposed to just shoddy research and shoddy workmanship. It's like he's really trying to say that this is a deliberate fabrication, as opposed to somebody who just got it wrong. But I think we have some interesting things here as we conclude our discussion on Blue Rock Springs. One of the things is that we have a description of the Zodiac Killer. That's why I said it's very good, stay tuned, please, because this is relevant no matter what part of the series you're in. We have this physical description provided by Mike Michaud, somebody who saw the Zodiac Killer. Beefy, heavyset, without being blubbery fat. Perhaps 195 to 200 pounds. First of all, that's very precise. 195 to 200 pounds? I mean, give or take a gram or something like that. Oh, that's very precise. Mike estimated that he was one head higher than Darlene's Corvair, so about 5 feet 8 inches tall. His pants had pleats, but Mike could see that he had a slight pot belly. Okay, so we got some guy that's kind of bigger, and I believe a lot of the estimates are, as far as age, they talk about how you could be dealing with somebody late 20s and early 30s. They even say maybe someone 26 to 30 years old. I think it's very important for us to talk about this, because back when we did our upload on Ross Sullivan, the Zodiac suspect Ross Sullivan, I mentioned that I had read on a forum that someone was saying that Ross Sullivan was over 300 pounds and he couldn't possibly be the Zodiac Killer if he weighed that much. Is that even a true thing? I don't know. I read it on a forum. Someone wasn't even citing their source where they got that from. So I was thinking, like, when I read this, I was reminded of it. Somebody wrote in, and corrected me very easily. Just because someone is 200 pounds or 250 pounds or 300 pounds, it doesn't mean they're necessarily going to be morbidly obese, because I did say Ross Sullivan was obese in the upload, and I was wrong. Incorrect statement. Because it's really true. I mean, someone can range from, it really depends on the muscle to fat ratio, right? And it's very difficult to gauge these physical descriptions, especially when they aren't trying to remember the details in the heat of the moment. I mean, to gauge exactly how tall someone was, exactly how big somebody was. Not to mention different body types are probably going to weigh more. Different body types are probably going to be quite different in all dimensions. So I think that this stuff is really throwing a lot of wrenches into the plans and into the sort of investigations that people are having about the Zodiac Killer. And it's been very difficult, because a lot of people are like, okay, well then we need to only look for a suspect that's around 195 to 200 pounds. But in reality, I mean, I just think it's very difficult to gauge somebody's weight just by looking at them. Details, though, like he had a slight pot belly, okay, that's somewhat valuable. Hair color, that's also very valuable. And, I mean, you can just really see, though, that I think, though, that eyewitness testimony has proven to be horribly unreliable. And we really see this in the Paul Stein incident, and we've talked about that during the anniversary upload. Like, multiple people saw the same person, and they're just giving different descriptions of height, different descriptions of weight. These things are just really clouding the Zodiac search. But one person that comes up as well in this chapter that we're discussing here, Darlene Ferrin's sister Pam, who was actually a friend of Mike Mageau, and according to Robert Graysmith, they had a conversation in the hospital they had a conversation in the hospital after Mike Mageau survived. He was visited by Darlene Ferrin's sister Pam, who went by the nickname D, like D-E-E. And Horan seems very doubtful of any of that. And he says it's most likely that conversation did not happen, because he just says it's so unlikely that a hospital would have let Darlene Ferrin's sister talk to Mike Mageau if she was not family and this was a police investigation. And, it's like only family members would be allowed to, of course, talk to the patient. So I think that's something that needs to also bear in mind. And, I mean, that's really what Thomas Horan is saying. He's really trying to say very clearly that these details are fabricated. There are even things when you have Robert Graysmith is taking real reports and he is just adding in fictitious lines. Like, he is taking the real case files, the real materials, and very small details get changed. Like, there was an argument at 10:30 a.m. in the parking lot of Terry's restaurant, as we said, so he changes it to 10:30 p.m. when Darlene Ferrin could have actually been there. It's like, you get a lot of things like that. But let's read from Thomas Horan's statement about Mike Mageau. Mike's statement, as typed by the police, did not mention anything about his and Darlene's money at all, even though he stated that they were going to Mr. Ed's to buy some food, and Darlene told her family that she was going out to buy fireworks. Mike did not explicitly state that they were robbed, and no one apparently asked for whatever reason. And what Horan talks about with this section is that, was this a potential robbery? Remember, he's talking about the Great Zodiac Killer Hoax, right? So was this a robbery that went sour, and that's what led to the death of Darlene Ferrin? What they also say, though, is just, I mean, you heard it right there. There's very little evidence that this was a robbery. And I believe another thing was that Mike's wallet was actually even left behind, so that also would go against any possibility that this was robbery. Let's continue. If Darlene's brother Leo told the truth when he later claimed that Darlene had gone to the park to buy Leo a bag of pot, that might explain why Mike did not tell investigators that the shooter had made off with all their money. Once again, he doesn't have the money, but Mike did still have his wallet, and I think that would be more likely to have been taken in a robbery. Not 100%, but I mean, what he was trying to do was hide the fact that they were going there to buy drugs, according to Horan. Another possible explanation is that they handed over their money to whoever was in the first car, and that the driver of the first car took the money as a payment up front, and the driver of the second car, whom they expected to deliver their drugs or whatever, and it says that drugs or whatever, shot them instead. Okay, well, I mean, that's really, as you see there, Darlene Ferrin had some sketchy things going on in her life, but that's a very bold statement to say that this was a drug deal gone wrong, because even reading that, I know we're talking about the Great Zodiac Killer Hoax theory and all, but still at the same time, I mean, it never ceases to shock me, this alternative possibility. What we've also really discussed in this theory is that, okay, Robert Graysmith is trying to paint every possible description of anyone in Darlene Ferrin's life as a stocky man who's just over 5 feet 8 inches tall, who has some dark brown curls, and he's trying to point everyone toward Arthur Lee Allen. And in short, I mean, Horan is saying with every single one, he's trying to give a different explanation. They're actually talking about a different person. They're actually talking about a Filipina. They're actually talking about a different person named Lee at one point. And Graysmith even writes about him in the book, referring to him as Bob, because his name was also Lee, L-E-E. So it's like, I think that there is a certain sense of possibility with that. I mean, I told you from the beginning in part 1 that I thought Graysmith was a clown. I still think he's a clown, but there's a difference between being somewhat of a clown and being an intentional fabricator of every single thing in there. I mean, people sometimes do want to write better stories, but what I would say about this is that I find the presentation on Blue Rock Springs much more convincing than I did on Lake Herman Road, because what Horan is simply saying is that Darlene Ferrin was at the park, and you heard it right there, that to buy a bag of marijuana for her brother Leo, and something went wrong with the drug deal. If I've heard Horan talk in the past, if I remember what he said about that as well, she was actually trying to involve Jim Phillips Crabtree in this, and that she actually wanted to get Crabtree set up, but her plan backfired, so that that's why Darlene Ferrin ended up getting shot. She was trying to get Jim Phillips Crabtree into some trouble, and I think Horan even said that Crabtree was present during the Blue Rock Springs shooting. Not that he killed Darlene Ferrin and shot Mike Mageau, but that he was present. You know, there are multiple people there at the scene of the crime, and I'd like to explore that possibility a little bit more. But what I can say is that, I mean, I still got to say, though, I think Mike Mageau pointed Arthur Lee Allen out of a lineup. There is that. And also, a lot of this, even though he's kind of citing his documents in a very bizarre way, there are no page numbers, there's no traditional format. Sometimes it's just a name. Sometimes it just says Darlene's Day. Very bizarre citations for somebody who's criticizing Robert Graysmith. When he cites Graysmith, he gives very clear citations. It's from the book Zodiac on page 27 to 28. But when he uses his own citations, they're kind of just, sometimes there's a name, sometimes it's a report that he's citing. It's not really done in a very academic format, so I gather. I mean, maybe it's a format I'm not familiar with that doesn't give much information out. But I'd say that that's a rather bizarre thing in itself. I mean, so as we conclude our discussions on Darlene Ferrin, I think it's very important for us to remember Horan has provided an alternative theory. It doesn't mean for a second that he's right about everything, because we're just going to keep exploring. But I think we can get bogged down on the conversations about the Zodiac's physical appearance forever. And, 195 to 200 pounds, that is way too precise to just guess with your eyes. I mean, and people are going to be saying that type of stuff about the Zodiac Killer until the end of time, until we find some definitive answers. So I think we should just kind of get away from some of those things, and let's look onward to some more kind of possibilities, and let's look at the research methods that these people are using. Well, that's all for me now. Please drop any comments you have below. Until next time.